I'm reading Luke chapter 20, verse 9 through 16, and this is the New American Standard. And he began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and rented it out to vine growers and went on a journey for a long time. At the harvest time, he sent a slave to the vine growers so that they would give him some of the produce of the vineyard. But the vine growers beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And he proceeded to send another slave, and they beat him also and threatened him shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. And he proceeded to send a third, and this one also they wounded and cast out. The owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him." But when the vine growers saw him, they reasoned with one another, saying, "This is the heir. Let us kill him, so that the inheritance will be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy these vine growers and will give the vineyard to others. When they heard it, they said, "May it never be."
You know, this parable is very clear to see as to what the Lord is talking about, this parable of the vineyard. And, you know, when we see this parable, and we look at it and we see it clearly as talking about them killing Jesus Christ and what the Jews were going to do. But I want us to see that in the parable itself is the past and the present and the future of the nation of Israel as it pertains to the Messiah and as it pertains to God Himself. Jesus took this parable, or at least the idea behind this parable, from Isaiah chapter 5 and verses 1 through 2. And actually, when we look at Mark's account in Mark chapter 12 and verses 1 through 12, we see that this particular text is quoted as a lead-in to this particular parable. So we know that Jesus was using that as kind of the basis for what He's saying to them in this parable. There in Isaiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 2, it says this, "Let me sing now of my beloved, a song of my beloved concerning his vineyard. My well-beloved had a vineyard on a fertile hill, and he dug it all around and removed its stones and planted it with the choicest vine. And he built a tower in the middle of it, and also hewed out a wine vat in it. Then he expected it to produce good grapes, but it produced only worthless ones." Then in verse 7 of that same chapter there in Isaiah chapter 5, it says, "For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his delightful plant. Thus he looked for justice, but behold bloodshed, for righteousness, but behold a cry of distress." So that's sort of the Old Testament background for this parable of the vineyard that Jesus tells, really focusing on the Jewish leadership, the Pharisees that were there at that particular moment. And in this parable, and even what Isaiah is talking about, is he talks about the same kind of problem that they were having in his day of disobedience of the people. We see here that Jesus revealed the hypocrisy of that Jewish leadership in verses 1 through 8. And I think that it's important for us to think about what was said in those verses as he leads into this, because it is their attitude that has caused them to be the ones that are the focus of the vineyard parable is found in what takes place before it. So they asked Jesus, they asked Jesus, "By what power do you do these things? By what authority do you do these things?" And they're focusing on Him cleansing the temple. Who gave you the right to do that? And so Jesus asked them a question in response. Was the baptism of John from God or from men? Now, that was a question that they weren't going to answer. Because if they said that the baptism of John was from God, which we understand that it was, then the natural response by Jesus was going to be, then why didn't you do it? Right? Because if it was from God, then it was now a part of Old Testament law. And so they would have been required to do it. Baptism by John was not any longer an option. It wasn't some kind of option. It was a requirement upon the Jews. And so he was going to ask them, why didn't you do it? But if they said that it was from man, Then they're just saying that John's out there just doing his own thing. It has nothing to do with God. And the people believed, and rightfully so, that John was a prophet. So they feared the people. And so they didn't want to answer the question. And it's very much like the denial of the miracles that they see Jesus doing on a daily basis and just rejecting what they are seeing with their eyes. They know that question should be answered from God. It's clear that John was from God. And yet they don't want to answer it. Because their heart is not really about God. It's not really about looking at what Jesus is doing and coming to an understanding, as the blind man did in John chapter 9, that no man, I was blind, but now I see, and only God can do that. Or as Nicodemus came to a conclusion in John chapter 3, that no man can do these things except he be from God. They're rejecting all that, and that is the mentality and the problem that Jesus is addressing in the parable of the vineyard. In verse 9 it says, a man planted a vineyard and rented it out to vine growers and went on a journey for a long time. Jesus is actually telling this to the people. They've seen this exchange with him and them in regard to John the Baptist, and now he kind of turns and says, I'm going to talk to you about your leaders now. This is the kind of people you have over you. And he says, a man planted a vineyard and rented it out to vine growers and went on a journey for a long time. See, God made a plan. God made a plan going all the way back there to Genesis chapter 3 when He made that promise that, through the seed of woman, that man would be redeemed. And so that promise is a part of God's plan, and a very big part of that is the people of Israel. And He allowed a people to be a nation. He made the nation of Israel what it was. And they were, as Isaiah chapter 5 says, they were His vineyard. They were the vineyard that we have here in this particular parable. Those who rented the vineyard are the leaders of the Jewish people. And so God, it says that He went on a journey for a long time. And really, as we look at this nation, as God has set it forth, but then God went into the long planning of bringing Jesus to this earth, reaching that fullness of time that Paul talked about in Galatians, when Jesus Christ would come to this earth. And for this long period of time, that vineyard was under the control of those leaders. And when we look at the Old Testament, we can talk about the New Testament leaders, and that's certainly the focus here. But it's always been the leaders of Israel that have led them astray. Constantly neglected them or purposely driven them into idolatry or to other things. And so it's an ongoing problem, whether we think about Ahab and Jezebel or others such as Manasseh. We can think about a lot. Even Solomon himself led the people into idolatry. So we have seen the leaders of Israel be those that have kept the vineyard from being what it should be. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But he went on this journey as he carried out this plan that would encompass many centuries of time, from Sinai all the way to the coming of Jesus Christ. Then in verses 10 through 12 it says, at the harvest time, He sent a slave to the vine growers so that they would give him some of the produce of the vineyard. But the vine growers beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And he proceeded to send another slave, and they beat him also and treated him shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. And he proceeded to send a third, and this one also was wounded and cast out. These servants that are sent to the vineyard and that are mistreated and cast out, these are the prophets that God sent to the nation time and time again to bring forth spiritual fruit among the people, to gather faithful people from the numbers. And yet they were always rejected. They were abused. They were mistreated by the leadership. They were sent to gather these faithful people from this vineyard, God's people. And they met opposition. Opposition like people like Ahab and Jezebel. Think about that. Think about Jezebel for just a moment. There, the northern kingdom. And we see Elijah have this great success on Mount Carmel, right? He defeats the prophets of Baal. It is a great victory. He has done it in front of the people. They are convinced. Ahab is even coming around. When you look at Ahab, it always amazes me how much patience God had with Ahab. He seemed to think Ahab might come around, or kept encouraging him to do so. But he had a bad problem at home, didn't he, with Jezebel. Ahab even seems to be coming around on Mount Carmel. But when he returns home and Jezebel finds out what took place, she has it out for Elijah. So right after this great victory, Jezebel sets out to kill Elijah, and it causes Elijah to run away, and run all the way, in fact, out of Israel and down all the way to Mount Sinai, where he laments to God that he's all alone. And yet God tells him that he's not. You remember Jeroboam. And Jeroboam, it is Jeroboam's sin that they never turned back from that caused the fall of the northern kingdom. And that was the sin of the golden calf at Dan and the golden calf at Bethel, right? The two golden calves that they would go to and worship God through. But that's not how God wanted to be worshipped. And He made a priesthood all His own. And if you remember, shortly after Jeroboam set forth those things so that the people would not go to Jerusalem anymore, a young prophet went up there. And God had told him to go into the land and to prophesy against the altar. And he did so. And Jeroboam was extending his hand to have him killed, and his hand shriveled up while he did it. That's what he was going to do to the prophet. And so the leaders had no problem punishing prophets, no problem mistreating prophets during those times. Manasseh, the one that would cause the fall of the southern kingdom. King Manasseh was known for the shedding of innocent blood. And when we see that statement of innocent blood, oftentimes that had most to do with men of God. He shed the blood of prophets. He shed the blood of those that were righteous. And so we see that Manasseh was one that certainly in the days before he repented and returned to God, he was one that was quick to mistreat those that had been sent. And certainly it is no different now. As Jesus tells this parable, these men that He is telling this parable right in front of are wanting to kill Him, are planning to kill Him, and have every intention to kill Him. So they don't have a problem with it. And they're going to put Him on the cross. And they've already tried at times to pick up stones and to stone Him. And so, when we read about what they did to the prophets, it comes all the way up to this moment that Jesus is talking. Verse 13, it says, the owner of the vineyard said, what shall I do? Well, I keep sending my servants. They should give me what's mine. They should give back to me what I deserve. So what am I going to do? Well, maybe they can't respect my slaves and they don't respect my servants. But most surely they'll respect my son, right? That's a whole other level. They'll respect my son, I'll send him. Mark chapter 12 and verse 6 said that He sent His son last of all. This was His last effort to bring them into compliance with His will. That respect that they should have had for Him lay within that messianic expectation that they had. That surely, when I send the person that they've been waiting for, the person that they have lived their lives thinking about, surely when I send him, they'll come around. He spent a long time preparing for Jesus, bringing it to that fullness of time. And Luke chapter 3 and verse 15 says that the people were in a great state of expectation. They were longing for the Messiah. Remember, even as a baby, when Jesus was first taken to the temple, Anna and Simeon were longing to see the one that would redeem Israel, the Messiah, the Christ. So the people were longing for it. They were waiting for it. They thought John the Baptist was it at first. John said, I'm not the Christ, but I'm preparing the way for Him. And he would later make it clear that he had found Him and that they needed to follow Him. Verses 14 through 15. But when the vine growers saw Him, so we've looked at the past, we've come up to the present, and now we're starting to glimpse the future, aren't we? But when the vine growers saw Him, they reasoned with one another, saying, this is the heir. Let us kill him, so that the inheritance will be ours. So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? You know, there is even in Jesus' parable here, there is an idea here of the obliviousness of these vineyard renters, I guess we could say, these leaders, and the actual Pharisees and Jewish leadership. They really think that after they kill the master's son, that they're going to get to keep the vineyard. Isn't that kind of absurd? I mean, he's not going to let them keep it. Oh, you can have it now. I don't have an heir to give it to, so y'all just keep it. Thanks for getting that out of the way, right? That's ridiculous. And they look at Jesus and they look at all that he does, and they keep denying. They say he's doing it by the power of Beelzebub. And it's this obliviousness to what is reality. And so we see it in the Pharisees and the men that were around Jesus, those that were in opposition to Jesus, just like we see this idea that somehow they could keep the vineyard. As if they could deny God and keep what he had given. They had no respect for the owner. All they wanted to be was the owner. They didn't want to hear what the one that had given it to them had to say. They just wanted to be the one in charge. Do it their way instead of God's way. The Son, most certainly being Jesus, they killed him in an effort to rule, to be in charge. And we see that in the text. In John chapter 11, verse 48, as they watch what's going on at the triumphant entry, they see how the people are singing praises to Jesus and are coalescing around Jesus. This is the statement they make. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. This has got to stop. Not because we deny what Jesus is doing. He's clearly doing these miracles. He's clearly raised Lazarus from the dead just a few days ago. He's clearly done all this. But he's going to take away what we want, and that's to be in charge. And so they wanted to kill him. That it was better to sacrifice one so that they could keep what they perceived to be their nation. So they wanted to get rid of Jesus. Well, what will the owner do? Well, Matthew chapter 21 and verse 41. It's interesting. It's a little different there as the parable's related there. Jesus asked the Pharisees, what would the owner do? These were rich men. It's very possible that they had things like vineyards that they rented out to people. And they sent their servants to get those things. And this probably really hit home with them. The poor people that Jesus is preaching to, they don't have vineyards. But these people do. And they know what it means to sin to get product from their vineyard that someone else has taken care of. A percentage. So I can just imagine what's going on in their mind. Boy, if that happened to me, I'll tell you what I'd do. Right? That kind of mentality. That kind of idea. And so there in Matthew chapter 21, verse 41, this is what they said. He will bring those wretches to a wretched end, and will rent out the vineyard to other vine growers who will pay him the proceeds at the proper season. And that's exactly right. That's exactly what should happen, right? Oh, they nailed it on the head. As they thought about their own situation maybe, they went right to the solution. You deal with the ones that are there, you rent it to someone, you give it to someone else, right? And here we see in our text that Jesus says this as well. Verse 16, he says, he will come and destroy these vine growers and will give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, may it never be. Because here in this particular text where Luke is recording it for us, they are seeing exactly what Jesus is driving at. In fact, every account of it, whether it's Matthew, Mark, or Luke, they all make it clear that these guys got exactly what Jesus was saying. And that they understood exactly the point that was being made. And here they say, may it never be. And it's this idea that it will never be that God will take away from us the nation. They know Isaiah chapter 5. God isn't going to take our nation away from us. And it's the same mentality. They could sit down and read the scroll of Jeremiah if they so chose and understand that in the days of Jeremiah, they thought the same thing. Ain't no way God will let this nation be conquered. No way He'll let the temple be destroyed. Because we're the descendants of Abraham, because the temple's here in Jerusalem. They had all the reasons as to why, but God still smashed the city to dust. Because see, they didn't think that obedience was as important as where they were or who their ancestors were. And that was the mistake. It doesn't matter how many generation preacher I am. I'm fourth generation, but you know what? That matters nothing. It just doesn't matter if I don't do what I'm supposed to do. I can't stand before Jesus Christ one day and go, well, the generations before me were preachers. It doesn't matter. If you remember, the Pharisees go out to John the Baptist, and he was a little more direct than most. And John said, don't even come out here. You brood of vipers. You're not coming out here to do anything but cause trouble. He said, don't even tell me you're a son of Abraham. I don't want to hear it. John was about repentance, wasn't he? He was about fruits in keeping with repentance. Change your life. That's what John was about. Do different. He said God can raise up children of Abraham from these rocks. You're not that special. And so here they don't think that could ever happen. May it never be. And they're going to try to kill Jesus, but you know, they just simply cannot accept that it would ever be given away. That it ever be taken from them. They believed that they were untouchable. You know, verses 17 through 18, he talks about the rejection of the cornerstone. And that comes from Psalm 118 and verse 22. We see that they rejected the cornerstone. They rejected Jesus. The cornerstone is what gives you strength as a building. And they rejected it. And so all that the building was or could be was lost in the rejection of the one that gave it strength. When Paul gave commentary in regard to Abraham and his seed, he said, and I want you to note that I didn't say seeds, I said seed. God said seed. That's Jesus. The only thing that made the nation of Israel special was Jesus Christ. And when they rejected Him, there was nothing about them special. And they're not God's people today, as so many in the religious world believe. They ceased to be that when they rejected God and rejected the Christ that He sent to them. And so we see that they rejected that cornerstone. They rejected the Messiah, the heart of their reason for being. They lived so much in the promise to Abraham. They were circumcised. That was so important to them, to be circumcised. And yet circumcision was a sign of the promise that Abraham, through your seed, all nations will be blessed. And folks, that's Jesus Christ. And so they're wearing the literal sign of the promise of Jesus, and then they reject the one that it represents. They gave it all away. Because He wasn't what they wanted. And it says that they will be scattered like dust. And so their rejection here is going to be their ruin. We can make a lot of applications from this. We can make a congregational application. That God has blessed us. He has given us this place, and He wants us to return to Him righteousness, service, fruit that is born. And we dare not fail in that. We dare not forget who we serve. We can also look at this from a personal standpoint. God has given me life. And all that I am, and the only reason I'm here is because of Him. He has given me life. He has given me salvation. He has given me blessings. And He expects fruit to be born. How many times? Colossians chapter 1. John 15. I expect you to bear fruit. Fruit of righteousness. Fruit of a life that shows that you are God's. And He expects that to be given to Him. And we dare not fail. We dare not reject the cornerstone that makes us special. And that's Jesus Christ. I'm not and you're not special in any way in and of ourselves except Jesus Christ in me. And Jesus Christ in you. And I hope that you embrace that and give to God what ultimately at the end is His and what He deserves. So that the vineyard that He has given to you will be one that bears fruit and gives to the one that is the Master. This evening, if we can help you come to Christ, we hope and pray that you will let us. If you need to bring your life back to Christ, maybe you've rejected His rule, maybe you've turned away from the things that He has wanted you to do, turn back. We can help you with that if we can pray with you, if we can encourage you. We want to. Why don't you come as we stand, as we sing. Rise up and build the name.